Hello and welcome to the very first episode of English Connection. I'm Clara, and today we're kicking off our podcast series exploring the fascinating ways language shapes our relationships.
And I'm Leo. I'm so excited to be starting this journey with you, Clara. We've got an amazing series planned that dives into how we use English to build connections with the people in our lives.
That's right, Leo. Over the next 6 episodes, we'll be exploring everything from how we express love and navigate conflicts to family dynamics, friendship, digital communication, and even the unspoken elements of our interactions.
And what better way to start than with today's topic, the language of love, expressing affection in English. I have to say, I'm a bit of a romantic at heart, so I'm particularly excited about this one.
I had a feeling you might be, and it's perfect timing with spring in the air. Today we'll be exploring how English speakers express romantic feelings, from those first butterflies to deep, committed love.
Absolutely. We'll look at the spectrum of affectionate expressions, flirting techniques, terms of endearment, digital romance language, and how poetic traditions influence everyday expressions of love.
So whether you're single, dating, or have been married for decades, there's something here for everyone. Ready to dive into the language of love, Leo?
I was born ready. Let's get started.
Let's begin with our first segment, from I like you to I love you, the spectrum of affection. English actually has a pretty nuanced way of expressing different levels of romantic interest.
Exactly. I find it fascinating how we can communicate such different degrees of feeling while using similar phrases. Like, there's a world of difference between saying, I like spending time with you versus I can't stop thinking about you.
Oh, definitely. And timing is everything. I remember my first serious boyfriend, we dated for 3 months before either of us said, I love you. It felt like such a big step.
It is. According to 5-Minute English, there are so many ways to express that gradual deepening of feelings. For instance, phrases like falling head over heels or being smitten capture those early intense feelings when you're just getting to know someone.
And then as feelings develop, we might move to saying things like, I'm falling for you, which is this beautiful way of expressing that in-between stage. You're not quite at I love you, but you're getting there.
I actually used that exact phrase with my wife on our 5th date. I wasn't ready to say the L word yet, but I wanted her to know how special she was becoming to me. I said, I think I'm falling for you, and her face just lit up.
That's so sweet. And it's the perfect middle ground, right? The not mentions that I'm falling for you describes that vulnerable feeling of falling in love. It's like you're not fully in control, which is exactly how new love feels.
And then once you're ready, there's the big one, I love you. But even that has variations like I'm so in love with you or I love you more each day that can express different intensities.
Don't forget, I love you to the moon and back. That one's always struck me as particularly sweet. It's saying your love is immeasurable.
And for deeply committed relationships, there are phrases like, you are my forever, or you're the love of my life. Those really communicate a lasting commitment beyond just current feelings.
I think what's beautiful about English is how we can fine-tune our expressions based on exactly where we are in a relationship. It's not just like or love. There's this whole rainbow of expressions in between.
Absolutely. It reminds me of how many words the Inuit supposedly have for snow. When something's important in a culture, the language develops all these nuanced ways to talk about it.
That's a perfect comparison. Love is so central to human experience that, of course, we've developed dozens of ways to express its different shades and intensities.
Now let's move on to our second segment, the subtle art of flirting in English. This is where things get fun.
And sometimes a little awkward, right? Flirting is this delicate dance where people try to express interest without being too direct. It's fascinating how much we rely on tone and playful language.
Absolutely. And English has these wonderful, playful expressions designed specifically for flirting. Take pickup lines, for example. They're often cheesy, but can be charming with the right delivery.
Oh gosh, some are so terrible, they're actually funny. Bold Voice mentioned a classic, did it hurt when you fell from heaven? It's ridiculous, but can make someone laugh if delivered with enough self-awareness.
I've actually used that one at a party in college. It was completely ironically, of course, and thankfully she laughed. We ended up dating for 6 months, so I guess even cheesy lines can work sometimes.
No way, I can't believe that worked. But I think that's the key. Flirting often uses humor to test the waters. Another one from the same sources, I thought happiness started with an H, but mine starts with U. Adorably cheesy.
The cheese factor is off the charts with that one. But flirting isn't all pickup lines. It's also about those subtle compliments and questions that show interest, like asking someone about their interests or saying something like, I've really enjoyed talking with you.
Definitely. And the meaning changes completely depending on tone and body language. I've enjoyed talking with you can be friendly or flirtatious based entirely on how you say it.
That's so true. I think English flirting relies heavily on innuendo and double meaning too. Like saying, would you like to come up for coffee? After a date, we all know it's not really about the coffee.
Exactly. It's providing this plausible deniability that protects both people's feelings if the interest isn't mutual. Another flirty phrase I've heard is, you sweep me off my feet, which Bold Voice describes as expressing that magical feeling when someone charms you in a special way.
I love that one. Flirting is really about creating this bubble of positive attention between two people. It's saying, I see you and I find you interesting, without spelling it all out.
And that's what makes it exciting. The uncertainty, the hints, the gradual discovery of mutual interest. It's like a verbal dance.
A verbal dance, that's a perfect description. And every culture does this dance a little differently, which makes cross-cultural flirting particularly interesting, and sometimes confusing.
Let's move on to our third segment, terms of endearment across cultures. I find this fascinating because we give such weird nicknames to people we love.
Right? When you think about it, calling someone honey or sweetheart is pretty strange if you take it literally, but these terms have such a long history in English.
They do, and it seems like every culture has their own versions. According to Envid in Poland, they use food terms like donut as terms of endearment, which I find absolutely adorable.
That's so cute. The same source mentioned that in Pakistan and India, people use John or Janu for their loved ones. I think there's something universal about giving special names to the people we care about.
Definitely. In English, we have the classics like honey, sweetheart, darling, and babe. I've always been partial to sweetheart myself. It sounds so warm and caring.
I tend to use honey with my wife. It just rolled off the tongue naturally early in our relationship and stuck. But I know some people really don't like certain terms of endearment. My sister absolutely hates being called babe, says it feels condescending.
That's an important point. These terms are very personal. Some people love pet names, others can't stand them. And some terms can come across as inappropriate in certain contexts.
Absolutely. Calling a colleague sweetie might be seen as unprofessional or even offensive, while the same term would be perfectly appropriate between partners.
And we shouldn't forget animal-based terms of endearment. The Engvid source mentioned Polish terms like kitty, frog, honeybee, puppy, and mouse. In English, we commonly use bunny, kitten, and bear.
I had a friend who called her boyfriend Tiger, which I always thought was cute. It's interesting how many terms of endearment are either food-related or animal-related across different languages.
I wonder if that's because historically those were the sweet things and cute creatures people encountered in everyday life. Like, you wouldn't call someone my little smartphone or laptop love.
Although in today's world, maybe someone would. Language evolves constantly. I'm curious to see if we'll develop more technology-based terms of endearment in the future.
That's a fascinating thought. Maybe you're my favorite notification will be the romantic compliment of the future.
Or, you're the only one I'd share my charger with. True modern love right there.
Speaking of the modern world, let's move to our fourth segment, digital love language, texting and online romance. This is where things have really changed in recent years.
Absolutely. The way we express romantic interest has been completely transformed by technology. Now there's this whole additional layer of interpretation. Are they typing? Did they read my message? Why haven't they responded?
Oh my goodness, the anxiety of those three dots appearing and disappearing. And don't get me started on trying to interpret the tone of a text message. I once had a huge argument with my ex because I thought his okay with a period seemed angry.
The deadly period, yes. It's amazing how punctuation has taken on emotional meaning in texts, and emoji have become their own language for expressing affection. A heart emoji from someone you're interested in can make your actual heart race.
And there's a whole hierarchy of heart emojis now. The red heart means something different from the purple heart, which is different from the heart eyes face. It's like we've developed this complex visual shorthand for different types of affection.
It reminds me of Victorian flower language, where different flowers conveyed different messages. We're doing the same thing with emoji. And abbreviations too. Sending ILI instead of I love you has a more casual, playful feel.
That's such a good comparison, and timing matters so much in digital communication. The not mentioned that message timing can take on huge significance in relationships. How quickly someone responds can be interpreted as a sign of their interest or commitment.
Definitely. I remember when my wife and I were first dating, We had this unspoken rule of trying not to text back too quickly so we wouldn't seem too eager. Now we just text whenever, and it's so much less stressful.
That dating dance is exhausting. But digital communication has also created beautiful new ways to maintain connection, like good morning texts or sending a quick heart emoji just to say, "I'm thinking of you." Those little digital touches can be really meaningful.
And let's not forget how technology has enabled long-distance relationships to thrive in ways that would have been impossible before. Video calls, shared streaming sessions, online games together, people have found such creative ways to feel close across distances.
That's such a positive way to look at it. Technology really has created new vocabularies of love, though I do think there's something special about a handwritten love letter that a text just can't match.
I'm with you there. My wife still has the handwritten notes I left in her textbooks when we were in college together. There's something so personal about seeing someone's handwriting and knowing they took that extra time.
Exactly. Though I suppose a thoughtfully crafted text can be its own kind of modern love letter. It's not the medium that matters most, but the thought and care behind the message.
Let's move to our final segment for today, poetry and metaphor in everyday romance. Even when we're not trying to be poetic, our romantic language is often steeped in metaphor.
It really is. Think about phrases like, "You light up my life," or "You make my heart skip a beat." These are deeply metaphorical ways of expressing how someone affects us.
Bold Voice highlighted a beautiful phrase, "You're the light of my life," which expresses how someone brings brightness and joy to your existence. That's pure poetry right there.
And from 5-Minute English, phrases like "to love with all your heart and soul" draw on this idea that love engages our entire being. It's not just a thought or emotion, but something that involves our very essence.
I've always been fascinated by how love songs influence our everyday expressions of affection. Lines from popular songs often make their way into how people actually speak to each other.
Absolutely. The not mentioned borrowing inspiration from literary greats like Shakespeare's "I do love nothing in the world so well as you" is not that strange, from Much Ado About Nothing, or Virginia Woolf's "Just in case you ever foolishly forget, I'm never not thinking of you."
Those are beautiful. And what I find most interesting is how many people incorporate these poetic elements into their own unique expressions. My wife and I have inside jokes and references that probably sound nonsensical to others, but are deeply romantic to us because of our shared history.
That's actually one of the most special things about romantic language, how couples develop their own private vocabulary. My parents have been married for 35 years, and they have all these phrases and nicknames that only make sense to them.
That shared language becomes a kind of intimacy in itself. I think that's why metaphors work so well in romantic contexts. They create this sense that you and I understand something special together.
That's such a beautiful way to put it, Leo, and it brings us full circle to what we were discussing earlier, how romance in any language is about creating connection and understanding between people.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today in our exploration of the language of love. We've looked at everything from the gradual spectrum of expressing affection to flirting techniques, terms of endearment, digital communication, and poetic expressions.
It's been such a fun conversation. I think what stands out to me most is how rich and varied the English language is when it comes to expressing love and affection. There really are so many ways to tell someone how you feel about them.
Absolutely. And I love how personal it can be. The words and phrases that resonate for each couple or individual can be so different, creating this beautiful tapestry of expressions across relationships.
That's such a lovely way to put it. And whether you're saying "I love you," sending a heart emoji, or using a personal nickname that only the two of you understand, what matters most is the genuine feeling behind the expression.
Exactly. Language is the vehicle, but the emotion is what drives it. And speaking of emotions, our next episode is going to explore the flip side of today's topic.
That's right. Next time on English Connection, we'll be discussing conflict and resolution, the words that heal or hurt. We'll look at how English speakers navigate disagreements, provide constructive criticism, apologize effectively, and repair relationships after conflict.
It's going to be another fascinating exploration of how language shapes our connections with others. After all, how we handle conflict is just as important as how we express love.
I couldn't agree more. So join us next time as we dive into the sometimes challenging but always important world of conflict resolution language.
And if you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with someone you care about, perhaps with one of those lovely terms of endearment we discussed.
Until next time, this is Clara.
And Leo, signing off from English Connection. Take care, everyone. Hello and welcome to the very first episode of English Practice, Everyday Conversations. I'm Leo.
And I'm Clara. We're so excited to launch this podcast series designed to help you improve your English language skills through natural conversations.
That's right. Each episode will explore different topics that relate to everyday life, all while helping you practice your vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation in a relaxed setting.
Our goal is to make learning English fun and practical. We'll discuss everything from daily routines, which is today's topic, to food, travel, careers, the environment, and technology.
And I should mention that I almost didn't make it here on time today because my alarm didn't go off. Talk about a morning routine disaster.
Oh no! Though I'm not surprised, Leo. Remember when we were preparing for this podcast last week and you showed up with your shirt inside out?
Hey, that was a fashion statement. Anyway, speaking of morning routines, that's exactly what we're diving into today. We'll be exploring daily routines, work-life balance, and how technology fits into our everyday lives.
We'll also look at different cultural perspectives on time and help you practice planning your ideal day. So let's get started with our first segment.
Let's kick things off with morning routines around the world. I'm genuinely curious, Clara, what does your typical morning look like?
Well, I'm definitely a morning person. I usually wake up around 6 a.m., do some stretching, have a cup of coffee while reading the news, and then get ready for the day. What about you, Leo?
6 a.m.? That's just wrong. I hit snooze at least 3 times before dragging myself out of bed around 7:30. Then it's a rush to shower, grab something quick for breakfast, and dash out the door.
That explains the inside-out shirt incident, but it's interesting how different our routines are. For our listeners practicing English, let's go through some useful vocabulary for describing morning activities.
Great idea. So we have phrases like to wake up, to get up, to hit snooze, to take a shower, or to have a shower, depending on where you're from.
And then there's to brush your teeth, to get dressed, to comb your hair, to put on makeup if that's your thing, and to have breakfast.
Don't forget time expressions that go with these activities, like at 7 a.m., in the morning, before work, after my shower, or as soon as I wake up.
And what's fascinating is how morning routines differ around the world. In Japan, for instance, many people begin their day with a traditional breakfast of rice, miso soup, fish, and pickled vegetables.
Meanwhile, in France, many people enjoy a simple breakfast of a croissant or bread with butter and jam, accompanied by coffee or hot chocolate. Nothing like the big American breakfast with eggs, bacon, and pancakes that you see in movies.
And in parts of India, morning routines might include yoga or meditation before a breakfast of idli, dosa, or paratha with chai. These cultural differences reflect deeper values about health, time, and family.
Absolutely. And I'd love to hear from our listeners about their morning routines. Do you leap out of bed ready to seize the day like Clara, or do you struggle like me?
Now let's move on to our next segment about work-life balance, which has become such a hot topic in recent years. Leo, how do you balance your work and personal time?
I feel like I'm constantly checking emails during dinner or thinking about podcast ideas when I should be relaxing. It's definitely a challenge.
I know what you mean. I've been trying to set better boundaries by turning off notifications after 8 p.m., but it's not always easy, especially when we were planning this podcast launch.
For our listeners, let's cover some useful expressions for discussing busy schedules. We say things like, I'm swamped with work, I'm snowed under, or I've got a lot on my plate right now.
And when things get too stressful, we might say, I'm burned out, I need to decompress, or I need some me time. These are all great expressions for talking about the need for better work-life balance.
When discussing hypothetical situations, conditional sentences come in handy. For example, if I had more free time, I would take up painting. Or if my boss weren't so demanding, I could leave the office earlier.
What's interesting is how different cultures approach work-life balance. In countries like Denmark or Sweden, there's often more emphasis on reasonable working hours and generous vacation time, reflecting a cultural value placed on leisure and family time.
Meanwhile, in places like Japan or South Korea, there's traditionally been more emphasis on long working hours and dedication to one's company, though that's changing with younger generations.
I think the pandemic really shifted perspectives globally. on this issue, more people started questioning whether the traditional 9 to 5 in an office was necessary or even desirable.
Absolutely. If the pandemic hadn't happened, I don't think remote work would have become so widely accepted so quickly. That's another good example of a conditional sentence, by the way. Let's talk about something that's completely changed our daily routines, technology. I woke up this morning and the first thing I did was check my phone. Is that bad?
You're not alone, Leo. Studies show that over 80% of smartphone users check their devices within 15 minutes of waking up. I'm guilty of it too, though I try to at least drink some water first.
I've actually been wondering if that's affecting my sleep quality. I read somewhere that the blue light from screens can mess with your circadian rhythm if you're on your phone right before bed.
That's a perfect example of how technology has inserted itself into the most intimate parts of our routines. And this gives us a chance to explore some useful tech vocabulary. We have devices like smartphones, tablets, laptops, smartwatches, and wireless earbuds.
And actions like to scroll through social media, to check your notifications, to stream content, to browse the web, or to charge your devices.
We also use a lot of expressions about our relationship with technology like screen time, digital detox, being glued to your phone, or falling down a rabbit hole when you spend hours watching videos online.
I'm definitely guilty of falling down YouTube rabbit holes. I started watching one video about making sourdough bread last weekend, and 3 hours later I was watching someone build a log cabin by hand in Alaska. I have no idea how I got there.
That's the algorithm for you. But this raises an interesting question about how technology impacts our productivity and attention spans. What do you think, Leo? Is technology making our lives easier or more complicated?
Both, I think. I can order groceries in seconds and video chat with friends across the world, which is amazing. But I also feel this pressure to always be available and responding to messages.
That connects to the broader cultural shift we're seeing where the boundaries between work and personal time have blurred, especially with remote work becoming more common. Technology enables flexibility, but can also make it harder to disconnect.
For our listeners practicing English, let me take a moment to focus on pronunciation. Tech terms can be tricky. Words like Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi, data, data, /data, or sometimes data, /cache, kayas. And brand names like iPhone, iPhone, or Huawei, Software.
Now it's time for our Cultural Minute. Today we're looking at global perspectives on time, which varies fascinatingly across cultures.
This is something I've experienced firsthand. I spent a semester studying in Spain, and I was constantly showing up to social gatherings on time, only to find I was the first one there by at least 30 minutes.
That's a perfect example. In many Mediterranean and Latin American cultures, there's a more fluid approach to time for social events. Being 15 to 30 minutes late might be completely normal and expected.
Meanwhile, in countries like Germany, Switzerland, or Japan, punctuality is highly valued. Being even 5 minutes late could be considered disrespectful.
And then there's the concept of polychronic versus monochronic time. Monochronic cultures, like many Western countries, tend to focus on doing one thing at a time, following schedule strictly, and valuing punctuality.
While polychronic cultures, common in many parts of Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East, are more relationship-focused. Multiple tasks might happen simultaneously, interruptions are normal, and schedules are more flexible.
These differences can lead to misunderstandings in international business or friendships. One person might perceive another as rude or disorganized, while the other might see their counterpart as cold or too rigid.
English has so many idioms about time too. We say time is money, on the dot for exactly on time, running late, or time flies when you're having fun.
We also say things like in the nick of time when something happens at the last possible moment, or better late than never when something delayed is still valuable.
I like saving time, as if we can store extra minutes in a bank somewhere, though I always seem to be running out of time instead.
Now, listeners, see if you can identify these different cultural attitudes toward time in this short dialogue we've prepared. Listen carefully for clues about how each speaker views punctuality and scheduling.
Let's move on to our conversation practice segment about planning your ideal day. This is a great opportunity to practice using future tenses in English.
Exactly. When we talk about future plans, we often use structures like going to or will. For example, tomorrow I'm going to wake up early, or I will go for a run in the park.
We can also use the present continuous for fixed arrangements. I'm meeting a friend for lunch at noon, or we're having dinner with my parents on Saturday.
When planning your ideal day, it's useful to express preferences with phrases like, I'd prefer to, I'd rather, I'd love to, or I'm hoping to.
And don't forget transition words to organize your ideas sequentially. First, then, after that, later on, finally.
Leo, let me ask you, if you could plan your perfect day with no work obligations, what would it look like?
My ideal day. First, I'd wake up naturally, no alarm clock, probably around 9 a.m. Then I'd have a leisurely breakfast while reading.
That sounds nice. What would you do after breakfast?
After that, I'd go for a bike ride along the river. Then I'd meet friends for lunch at that new cafe we've been wanting to try. What about you, Clara?
Well, I'd start early because I love mornings. First, I'd go for a run at sunrise. Then I'd have coffee on my balcony. After that, I'd probably spend a few hours at a museum. I find art so energizing. Later, I'd meet my sister for dinner and catch a live music show.
That sounds like a packed day. We're quite different, aren't we? I notice my ideal day involves a lot more downtime.
Now it's your turn, listeners. Think about your ideal day and try to describe it using the future tenses and transition phrases we've discussed. What would you do first? Where would you go? Who would you spend time with?
Well, we've covered a lot today in our very first episode. We've talked about morning routines around the world, work-life balance, technology in everyday life, cultural perspectives on time, and planning your ideal day.
We hope you've picked up some useful vocabulary and expressions related to daily routines. Remember, the best way to improve your English is to practice using these new words and phrases in your own conversations.
Before we wrap up, let's quickly review some key vocabulary from today's episode. We covered morning routine verbs like wake up, get up, take a shower, and have breakfast.
We also discussed expressions related to busy schedules like I'm swamped with work and I need to decompress, as well as tech vocabulary like screen time and digital detox.
And don't forget those useful time expressions and transition phrases for organizing your ideas first, then after that, later on.
In our next episode, we'll be diving into one of my personal favorite topics, food, cooking, and dining out. We'll explore vocabulary for describing tastes and flavors, cooking techniques, restaurant experiences, and food idioms.
I'm already getting hungry just thinking about it. We'll also share some of our favorite recipes and restaurant experiences and discuss food traditions from around the world.
So join us next time to expand your culinary vocabulary and learn how to talk about food preferences, dietary restrictions, and dining experiences in English.
Until then, we encourage you to practice what you've learned today. Pay attention to your daily routine and try describing it in English. Notice how technology fits into your day and reflect on your own work-life balance.
Thank you so much for listening to our first episode of English Practice Everyday Conversations. If you enjoyed it, please share it with friends who are also learning English.
And we'd love to hear your feedback. What topics would you like us to cover in future episodes? What aspects of English do you find most challenging?
Until next time, have a wonderful day.
Goodbye, everyone.
Hello and welcome to Empowering English. I'm Clara and I am absolutely thrilled to kick off this brand new podcast series with you today.
And I'm Leo. Clara, I can't tell you how excited I am to finally launch this project we've been working on for months. Today marks the beginning of our journey exploring the wonderful world of storytelling in English.
That's right, Leo, and for our listeners who are just tuning in, Empowering English is all about practical and engaging English listening practice with a special focus on storytelling. We believe that stories are one of the most powerful tools for language learning.
Absolutely. In each episode, we'll be exploring different aspects of oral storytelling, from building your confidence to connecting with your audience emotionally. Whether you're learning English or looking to improve your storytelling skills, we've got something valuable for everyone.
And we're kicking things off with Episode 1, The Foundations of Storytelling in English. Today, we'll dive into why stories matter in language learning, the basic elements of a good story, finding your authentic voice, and so much more.
I can already feel the creative energy flowing, Clara. Let's get started.
So, Leo, I think a great place to begin is by talking about why stories are so important when it comes to learning languages. I know from my own experience learning Spanish that textbooks just didn't cut it.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. When I was studying French, I made more progress in a month of reading simple French stories than I did in a year of vocabulary lists and grammar exercises. There's something about stories that just sticks with you.
That's exactly it. And there's actually research that backs this up. According to an article one read on 5-Minute English, storytelling activates multiple areas of the brain, which makes it easier for students to absorb and retain new words and grammatical structures.
That makes perfect sense. When you're engaged in a story, you're not just memorizing words, you're experiencing language and context. You're feeling emotions, visualizing scenes. It's a totally different way of processing information.
Exactly. And speaking of emotions, that's another huge benefit. When learners empathize with characters or feel suspense in a story, these emotions create strong, memorable associations with new words and phrases. It's like your brain puts little emotional sticky notes on the vocabulary.
I love that image. Emotional sticky notes. You know, I still remember certain Japanese phrases, not because I studied them extensively, but because they were in this hilarious story my language partner told me about getting lost in Tokyo. I can still picture the whole scene in my head years later.
That's the magic of it. Stories provide this rich, immersive experience that no textbook could ever replicate. When you're captivated by a story, you naturally become more engaged and motivated to understand the language.
And let's not forget the cultural aspect. One of the most substantial benefits of incorporating storytelling into language learning is that it acts as a cultural bridge. Language isn't just words and rules, it's deeply connected to culture.
Absolutely. Stories give us insight into social norms, values, and traditions of English-speaking communities. They help learners understand the why behind certain expressions or customs.
I think that's why folk tales and legends are so valuable for language learners. They contain these cultural nuggets that have been passed down for generations.
Speaking of different types of stories, Leo, I think it would be helpful for our listeners to understand some of the terminology we use in English to describe different types of stories.
Great idea. There's actually quite a variety of terms, and using the right one shows a deeper understanding of English.
Exactly. For instance, a myth is something that isn't necessarily true but is believed by many people, like, don't believe in that old myth. Whereas a legend is often about historical figures, like when we say, we studied ancient Greek legends in school.
And then there's the term urban legend, which refers to modern untrue stories where the origins are unknown. Like that story everyone seems to know about someone finding a dead mouse in their soda and suing the company for millions. Classic urban legend.
Oh, I've heard that one. Then we have fairy tales, which are stories with happy endings. Those were my absolute favorite as a child. I would beg my parents to read Hans Christian Andersen stories to me every night.
That's so sweet. I was more of a Brothers Grimm kid myself. A bit darker, but still fascinating. And let's not forget about old wives' tales, which are beliefs people pass down without any scientific basis. Like the idea that going outside with wet hair will give you a cold.
My grandmother still believes that one. She'd chase me around the house with a towel if I tried to go outside after washing my hair. But knowing these terms isn't just about vocabulary, it helps English learners understand the cultural context too.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is how every culture has its own storytelling traditions, but when we learn English, we're also learning how stories are structured and valued in English-speaking contexts.
Now that we've talked about why stories matter and different types of stories, let's dig into the anatomy of a compelling English story. What makes a story work?
That's such an important question. At its core, a good story in any language needs structure. In English storytelling, we typically follow a clear narrative arc: beginning, middle, and end or introduction, rising action, climax, and resolution.
Right. The introduction sets the scene and introduces the characters. The rising action builds up the plot with conflicts or challenges. The climax is the turning point of the story, and then we have the resolution, where everything comes together.
This structure isn't unique to English, but understanding it helps English learners organize their thoughts when telling stories. It gives you a framework to hang your vocabulary and grammar on.
Absolutely. And speaking of organizing thoughts, I think that's one of the biggest challenges for language learners, figuring out how to sequence events logically when telling a story in their second language.
Oh, definitely. I remember when I first started telling stories in Japanese, I'd get so mixed up with the order of events, I'd be halfway through and realize I forgot to mention something important at the beginning.
Happens to the best of us. That's why learning transition words and phrases is so helpful. Words like first, then, after that, meanwhile, finally. They act like signposts in your story, guiding both you and your listener through the narrative.
Those small words make such a big difference. And another thing that's important in English storytelling is the use of descriptive language. English has so many specific words to paint a picture, not just walk, but stroll, stride, wander, March.
Yes, that richness of vocabulary allows for more vivid storytelling. But I think it's also important to remember that you don't need advanced vocabulary to tell a good story. Simple words used well can be just as effective.
That's such an important point, Clara. Some of the most powerful stories are told with simple language. It's not about using fancy words. It's about connecting with your audience and conveying meaning clearly.
Let's move on to something that I think many English learners struggle with, finding their authentic voice when telling stories in a second language.
Oh, this is such a crucial topic. I read this fascinating article about someone who grew up speaking Farsi but wrote in English. They talked about how challenging it was to translate not just their words, but their entire life experience from one language to another.
That resonates so much. There's this constant internal translation happening, and sometimes it can feel like you're not fully yourself when speaking another language. Your personality can feel different.
Exactly. The article mentioned this powerful line: what if your stories resist the language you wish to write them in? What if your characters refuse to speak it, refuse to have their lives translated into a language foreign to them? I think many language learners feel that resistance.
That's so beautifully put. I experienced something similar when I was studying abroad in Mexico. I remember feeling frustrated because my jokes weren't landing the same way in Spanish, and I couldn't express my usual sarcasm effectively. I felt like part of my personality was lost.
I've been there. For me, it was trying to be funny in French. Humor is so culturally specific, and my American-style jokes just didn't translate. But you know what? Over time, I developed a slightly different, but still authentic French-speaking version of myself.
That's exactly it. Finding your authentic voice in a second language doesn't mean you have to sound exactly like you do in your native language. It's about balancing correct English with natural expression and allowing your personality to shine through, even if it manifests a bit differently.
And I think that's liberating in a way. You're not just learning a language, you're developing a new facet of your identity. Language isn't just a vessel, it's a living entity. It changes as we change, lives as we live.
I love that perspective. It's not about perfectionism, it's about communication and connection. Some of the most engaging storytellers I know in English are native speakers, but they speak with such authenticity and passion that it doesn't matter if they make minor grammar mistakes.
Absolutely. Authenticity trumps perfection every time. And speaking of authentic storytelling, I think a big part of finding your voice is drawing from your own experiences. Your unique perspective as someone who sees the world through the lens of multiple languages and cultures is actually an advantage.
Now let's talk about something that can make or break a story pacing and rhythm in English narratives.
Oh, this is so important. Pacing is like the heartbeat of your story. Too slow, and you lose your audience's interest. Too fast, and they can't keep up with the important details.
Exactly. And in English specifically, understanding natural pauses and emphasis is crucial. English has this unique rhythm to it. Certain words get stressed, others don't. When you're telling a story, those natural rises and falls in tone and emphasis help keep your listeners engaged.
That's so true. I remember when I first started telling stories in English, I would speak in this monotone voice because I was so focused on getting the grammar right. But a good friend pointed out that I needed to vary my tone to speed up during exciting parts and slow down for dramatic moments.
That makes such a difference. And you know what I've noticed helps with pacing? Understanding the power of silence. Strategic pauses can build suspense or give your listeners a moment to process what you've just said.
Oh, I love a good dramatic pause. It's like that moment when you're about to reveal the twist in your story and you just wait. And suddenly everyone is leaning forward, hanging on your every word.
You're a natural, Leo. And, another aspect of pacing is knowing which details to expand on and which to summarize. Not every part of your story needs the same level of detail.
That's such a good point. I think new storytellers often feel like they need to give equal weight to every detail, but that can really bog down your narrative. The key is to focus on the moments that matter most, the turning points, the emotionally charged scenes, the surprising revelations.
Exactly. And this is something that comes with practice. The more stories you tell, the better you get at sensing which parts are resonating with your audience and which parts you can move through more quickly.
And speaking of practice, that brings us to our final segment. It's time for our listeners to try their hand at storytelling.
All right, everyone, it's time for our first storytelling exercise. This is where the rubber meets the road, where we put everything we've been discussing into practice.
I'm so excited about this. We want to make this super approachable, so we're starting with a simple 1-minute personal anecdote. This is perfect for beginners and advanced learners alike.
Here's how it works. We want you to think of a brief, simple experience from your life. It could be something funny that happened to you recently, a small misunderstanding, or even just an interesting encounter you had.
The key is to keep it short and focused. Don't try to tell your entire life story. Just one small incident with a clear beginning, middle, and end.
And to help you get started, here are some opening phrases you might use. Did I ever tell you about the time when? You'll never guess what happened last week. Or I remember one time when.
Those are great starters. And as you tell your story, try to incorporate some of the transitional phrases we mentioned earlier, words like first, then after that, and finally.
Exactly. And don't worry about being perfect. The goal here is just to practice organizing your thoughts in English and getting comfortable with the narrative structure.
Shall we model this for our listeners, Claire? I'd be happy to share a quick 1-minute story as an example.
That's a fantastic idea, Leo. Go ahead. I'm all ears.
Okay, here goes. Did I ever tell you about the time I locked myself out of my apartment in the middle of winter? So last January, I had just moved to this new building and I was still getting used to the routine. One morning, I was running late for work, and I rushed out the door in such a hurry that I forgot my keys on the kitchen counter. I didn't realize my mistake until I got home that evening, exhausted after a long day. When I reached into my pocket, nothing. No keys, and to make matters worse, it was snowing, and I was only wearing a light jacket. First, I tried calling my landlord, but there was no answer. Then, I remembered that my neighbor had a spare key. Thankfully, she was home and came to my rescue. After that embarrassing experience, I made a spare key and hid it outside my apartment. I haven't locked myself out since.
That was perfect, Leo. You had a clear beginning, middle, and end. You used transition words naturally, and even though it was a simple story, it was engaging. I could picture you shivering outside your apartment.
Thanks, Clara. Now it's your listener's turn. Pause this podcast if you need time to think of your story. Remember, it doesn't have to be extraordinary. Sometimes the most ordinary experiences make the best stories when told well.
And if possible, try telling your story to a friend or language partner. Ask them for feedback. Was the story clear? Could they follow the sequence of events? Did you use appropriate transition words?
And remember, this is just the beginning of your storytelling journey. The more you practice, the more natural it will become. Soon, you'll be incorporating these skills into your everyday English conversations without even thinking about it.
Well, Leo, we've covered a lot of ground in this first episode. We've talked about why storytelling matters in language learning, the basic structure of stories in English, finding your authentic voice, pacing, and rhythm, and even practiced with our first storytelling exercise.
It's been such a joy to kick off this series. I really believe that storytelling is one of the most powerful tools for language learners. It's not just about grammar and vocabulary, it's about connection, expression, and bringing your unique perspective to the world.
Absolutely. And what I love about this approach is that it makes language learning so much more engaging and meaningful. You're not just memorizing phrases from a textbook, you're learning to share your experiences and connect with others.
And that's really what language is for, isn't it? Connection. Whether you're telling a simple anecdote about your day or sharing your life's journey, stories bridge the gap between cultures and create understanding.
Beautifully put, Leo. And speaking of more stories, in our next episode, we'll be diving deeper into crafting motivational personal anecdotes. We'll explore how to shape your personal experiences into stories that inspire and motivate others.
I can't wait for that one. We'll be looking at the elements of a motivational story, vocabulary for emotional impact, and the power of vulnerability in storytelling. It's going to be a fantastic episode.
Absolutely. And until then, we encourage all of our listeners to keep practicing with the storytelling exercise we shared today. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
That's right. And remember, every great storyteller started somewhere. Don't be discouraged if it feels challenging at first. That's all part of the learning process.
Thank you so much for joining us for this first episode of Empowering English. If you enjoyed it, please share it with friends who might benefit from improving their English storytelling skills.
And we'd love to hear your stories and feedback. Until next time, keep telling your stories. The world needs your voice.
Take care, everyone, and happy storytelling. Good morning, sunshine. I'm Clara.
And I'm Leo. Welcome to our final episode of Motivational Mornings.
Today we're tackling something really practical, measuring progress and creating lasting change with your affirmation practice.
That's right. We've covered so much ground in this series, from the science behind affirmations to crafting personalized ones, integrating them into your routine, overcoming obstacles, and exploring advanced techniques.
And now we're bringing it all together with strategies to track your progress and ensure these positive changes stick around for the long haul. Because let's face it, transformation isn't a one-and-done thing.
Exactly. I got this message from a listener named Jamie who said, "I'm loving my morning affirmations, but how do I know they're actually working? Some days I feel amazing, and other days I wonder if I'm just talking to myself in the mirror for nothing."
Oh, I can totally relate to that feeling. It's so common to wonder if all this positive self-talk is really making a difference. That's exactly why tracking your progress is so crucial.
Let's start with something fundamental, understanding the difference between subjective and objective measures of change. What are some markers of transformation we should be looking for?
Great question. When it comes to measuring progress with affirmations, we really need both subjective and objective indicators. Subjectively, you might notice shifts in how you feel or think about yourself.
Right, like maybe you feel less anxious before presentations, or you catch yourself having more positive thoughts throughout the day.
Exactly. But then there are also objective measures, observable behaviors, or outcomes that others might notice too. If your affirmations are about being more confident in meetings, an objective measure might be how often you speak up or contribute ideas.
I've definitely experienced that. When I started using confidence affirmations, I didn't immediately feel different, but my boss commented that I seemed more assertive in client meetings. That external feedback was so validating.
That's such a perfect example, and it points to something really important. Sometimes others notice changes in us before we do. Our brains are wired to maintain consistency in how we see ourselves, so we might miss gradual shifts that are obvious to others.
That's why I actually started asking trusted friends for feedback on specific areas I was working on. Not in a fishing for compliments way, but just asking, have you noticed any difference in how I handle stress lately? Their observations have been eye-opening.
Love that approach. And you know what else is helpful? Tracking emotional states. I keep a simple 1 to 10 rating of key emotions like confidence, calm, and gratitude. Just a quick daily check-in helps me see patterns over time. Now let's talk about one of my favorite tools for measuring progress, journaling for awareness. This has been absolutely transformative in my own practice.
Oh yes, journaling creates this amazing record of your journey. I'm actually terrible at remembering how I felt 3 months ago, so having it written down is invaluable.
Exactly. And structured reflection techniques can make journaling even more powerful for tracking affirmation progress. One approach I love is the before and after documentation.
Tell me more about that. How does it work?
So before you start a new affirmation, you write down your current state related to that area, how you feel, think, and behave. Then at regular intervals, maybe monthly, you reflect on the same questions and note any changes. It creates this really clear picture of your evolution.
That's brilliant. I do something similar but with a twist. I date my journal entries about situations that relate to my affirmations. Like if my affirmation is about staying calm under pressure, I'll document challenging situations and how I responded. Reading those entries chronologically shows my progress so clearly.
I love that approach. And you know what else is fascinating to track? Synchronicities and evidence that seem to align with your affirmations. As Psychology Today points out, for a new behavior to become integrated into our brains in a way that sticks, there needs to be a cognitive and a positive emotional component attached.
Yes. When I started affirming abundance, I began noticing little gifts everywhere. A free coffee from a friend, finding money in an old coat pocket, an unexpected discount. Tracking these moments helped wire my brain to notice evidence supporting my affirmation.
That's exactly it. Our brains have this confirmation bias that we can actually use to our advantage. By intentionally recording evidence that supports our affirmations, we strengthen those neural pathways and accelerate our progress.
Let's talk about accountability systems. Having someone else involved in your affirmation practice can make such a difference in maintaining consistency and measuring progress.
Absolutely. As the American Psychological Association notes, involve a buddy. Whether it be a friend, coworker, or family member, someone else on your journey will keep you motivated and accountable.
That's been huge for me. My sister and I actually text each other our affirmations every morning. Just knowing she's expecting that text gets me out of bed some days.
That's wonderful. And there's this interesting balance between public commitments and private practice. Some aspects of affirmation work are deeply personal and might feel better kept private, while other aspects benefit from being shared.
I've found that sweet spot by having one affirmation I share publicly and others I keep just for myself. The public one creates accountability, but I still have that private, sacred space for deeper work.
That's such a thoughtful approach, and technology can be incredibly helpful for tracking and reminders. I use an app that prompts me to rate how strongly I believe my affirmations each week, and watching those numbers gradually increase is so motivating.
Tech tools are amazing for this. I've actually started using a voice memo app to record myself saying my affirmations, and then I listen back to recordings from months ago. Hearing the increasing confidence in my voice over time is mind-blowing.
Ooh, I've never thought about tracking the qualitative aspects of my voice. That's brilliant. And it's a perfect example of getting creative with how you measure progress, finding metrics that are meaningful to you personally. Now let's talk about something really important, knowing when it's time to evolve your affirmations as you grow.
This is crucial. I've definitely had the experience of an affirmation feeling super powerful at first, but then kind of losing its punch after a while.
Yes. That usually happens for one of two reasons. Either the affirmation has done its job and you've integrated that belief, or you've outgrown that particular wording and need to take it to the next level.
That's exactly it. When I first started, my confidence affirmation was, I am becoming more confident each day. After a few months, that felt too tentative, so I shifted to, I am confident in my unique gifts. Now it's evolved to, my confidence inspires others to believe in themselves.
I love seeing that progression. You can really trace your growth through how your affirmations evolve, and seasonal adjustments can be really powerful too. The affirmations that serve you in a challenging career transition might be different from what you need during a period of expansion.
Absolutely. I've started doing quarterly reviews of my affirmations, almost like a personal board meeting. I look at what's changed in my life, what new challenges I'm facing, and adjust my affirmations accordingly.
That quarterly review is such a smart practice, and on the topic of progressive challenges, I've found it helpful to intentionally make my affirmations more expansive as I master the basics. It's like leveling up in a video game.
Yes. I think of it as my affirmation practice growing alongside me. As Zen Habit says, the most essential element to long-term personal growth is to continually optimize. Our affirmations should optimize along with us.
Exactly, and that's why regular progress checks are so valuable. They help you recognize when you've reached a plateau with a particular affirmation, and it's time to level up to the next challenge.
Let's talk about the compound effect. How tiny, consistent actions with affirmations lead to major transformations over time.
Oh, this is one of my favorite topics. It's so easy to underestimate the power of small daily practices because we're wired to notice big, dramatic changes.
Exactly. It's like that quote, people overestimate what they can do in a day and underestimate what they can do in a year. Affirmations work the same way. Each individual repetition might seem insignificant, but they accumulate powerfully over time.
That's so true. And as Den Habits points out, instead, we need to focus on making little but constant improvements throughout our life. That's exactly how affirmations work. Small daily deposits into your mental bank account that compound over time.
I love that banking metaphor. And the mathematics of daily practice is actually fascinating. If you do a 2-minute affirmation practice every day for a year, that's over 12 hours of positive mental programming.
That really puts it in perspective. And what's amazing is how these small shifts eventually reach a tipping point. For months, change might be subtle and gradual, and then suddenly you're responding to a situation in a completely different way than you would have before.
I had exactly that experience with my patients' affirmations. For the longest time, I wasn't sure if they were working, and then one day my computer crashed in the middle of a project deadline. Instead of my usual meltdown, I just took a deep breath and calmly figured out a solution. My roommate was shocked.
That's such a perfect example of a tipping point. And to be clear, it wasn't magic. It was the cumulative effect of all those daily affirmations rewiring your default response. As the Psychology Today article mentions, awareness of this tendency can be humbling, but that awareness can open the way to become curious and interested, and eventually to find creative ways to conquer change.
Absolutely. And celebrating those small shifts is so important. I used to only acknowledge the big wins, but now I celebrate the tiny victories too, like noticing a negative thought and replacing it before it spirals. Those micro moments of awareness are actually where the real transformation happens.
Now let's explore how we can move from personal practice to creating positive ripple effects in our community.
This is such an exciting progression. When our affirmation practice starts to transform us, it naturally begins to affect those around us too.
Exactly. Group affirmation practices can be incredibly powerful. I started a small morning intention circle with some friends where we share our affirmations for the week and support each other's growth. The collective energy is amazing.
That sounds wonderful. I've experienced something similar with a meditation group that incorporates affirmations. There's something really powerful about speaking your affirmations in the presence of supportive others.
There really is, and teaching or sharing your practice with others can deepen your own commitment. I found that when I started helping my niece create affirmations for test anxiety, I became much more consistent with my own practice.
That's so true. I've had the same experience with mentoring new team members. When I share how affirmations have helped me overcome public speaking fear, it renews my appreciation for how far I've come.
And there's that beautiful ripple effect that happens naturally as we embody the changes from our affirmations, becoming more confident, patient, compassionate, or whatever qualities we're developing. We unconsciously give others permission to grow in those ways too.
Absolutely. My favorite example of this was when my dad, who always teased me about my woo-woo morning routine, started asking questions about how affirmations work. He'd noticed how much calmer I was during family crises and wanted some of that for himself.
I love that story. It perfectly illustrates how the most powerful way to influence others isn't through convincing them, but through embodying the change. When people see real transformation in us, they get curious about how they might create that for themselves.
Let's talk about the ultimate goal of affirmation practice, integration, and embodiment. There comes a point where the affirmations become your natural thought pattern.
Yes, this is really the promised land of affirmation work. Eventually, you may not need the formal practice anymore because you've so thoroughly rewired your default thinking.
Exactly. It's like learning to drive. At first, you have to consciously think about every step, but eventually it becomes automatic. The positive self-talk gets integrated into who you are.
That's such a perfect analogy, and as Psychology Today points out, for a new behavior to become integrated into our brains in a way that sticks, there needs to be a cognitive and a positive emotional component attached. That's why coupling affirmations with positive feelings is so crucial for this integration.
I've definitely experienced this with I handled challenges with Grace's affirmation. At first, I had to repeat it consciously during stressful situations. Now, taking a deep breath and finding that calm center happens automatically. The affirmation has become part of my operating system.
That's beautiful, Leo. And you know what's fascinating? You can actually track your progress toward integration by noticing how much conscious effort your positive self-talk requires. As it becomes more automatic, that's a sign of true integration.
I love that metric. And I think another sign of integration is when other people start using phrases or concepts from your affirmations to describe you. When my colleague introduced me as the most creative problem solver on our team, which was one of my daily affirmations, I knew that belief had truly become part of my identity.
Yes. External mirroring is such powerful confirmation of integration, and ultimately living as the embodiment of your affirmations means they've transformed from aspirational statements to your authentic reality. As we start wrapping up our final episode, I think it would be helpful to summarize the key strategies we've discussed for measuring progress and creating lasting change.
Great idea. We started with markers of transformation, both subjective measures like changes in your thoughts and feelings, and objective measures like observable behavior changes.
Then we explored journaling for awareness, using structured reflection techniques, before and after documentation, and tracking synchronicities or evidence that supports your affirmations.
We discussed creating accountability through affirmation partners, finding the right balance between public commitments and private practice, and using technology tools for tracking and reminders.
We talked about evolving your practice by recognizing when it's time to update your affirmations, making seasonal and life transition adjustments, and creating progressive challenges for continued growth.
We explored the compound effect, understanding incremental change over time, celebrating small shifts that lead to major transformations, and appreciating the mathematics of consistent daily practice.
We discussed moving from personal to collective practice through group affirmation work, teaching and sharing your practice with others, and creating positive ripple effects through your transformed presence.
And finally, we talked about integration and embodiment, moving beyond needing formal practice, as affirmations become your natural thought patterns, and truly living as the embodiment of your affirmations.
Throughout all of these approaches, the key is consistency and patience. As the article from Me Not Alone reminds us, motivation isn't a fixed personality trait, it's more like the weather. It changes frequently. So having these tracking systems helps us maintain progress even when our motivation naturally fluctuates.
I'd love to share a personal story about how measuring progress has made a difference in my affirmation practice, if that's okay.
I'd love to hear that. Please share.
So about a year ago, I started working with the affirmation, I communicate with clarity and purpose, because I noticed I was rambling in meetings and people weren't connecting with my ideas. At first, it felt completely fake. I knew I was anything but clear.
I think we've all felt that initial disconnect between our affirmations and reality.
Definitely. But here's where measurement made all the difference. I created a simple tracker in my phone where after each meeting or presentation, I'd rate myself from 1 to 10 on clarity. For the first month, I was consistently giving myself 3s and 4s.
That kind of honest baseline measurement is so valuable. What happened next?
Well, I kept up with my affirmation practice every morning, and I also added one concrete action, spending 5 minutes before each meeting outlining my key points. By month 3, my self-ratings had climbed to mostly 6s and 7s, but the real validation came when my team lead mentioned in my review that my communication had become remarkably more focused and effective.
That external validation is so powerful. Did having those measurements help your motivation?
Absolutely. There were weeks when I didn't feel like I was making progress, but being able to look back at my ratings from 2 months earlier showed me how far I'd come. Without that concrete tracking, I might have given up, assuming the affirmations weren't working.
That's exactly why measurement is so crucial. And now, has that affirmation become integrated?
It really has. I've actually evolved it now to my communication inspires action and collaboration because clarity has become my new baseline. Looking back at those early 3/10 ratings reminds me that lasting change really is possible with consistent practice and good tracking systems.
As we come to the end of our Motivational Morning series, I feel a real sense of gratitude for this journey we've taken together.
Me too. From exploring the science behind affirmations to now wrapping up with strategies for measuring progress and creating lasting change, we've covered so much ground. And I've learned as much from creating this podcast as I hope our listeners have from tuning in.
Absolutely. And if there's one thing I hope everyone takes away from this series, it's that transformation is possible. Whether you're using affirmations to build confidence, reduce anxiety, improve relationships, or any other area of growth, consistent practice coupled with good tracking systems can create remarkable change.
And remember what we said in our very first episode, this isn't about becoming a different person. It's about uncovering the most authentic, empowered version of yourself that's been there all along.
That's such an important reminder, Leo. And for our listeners who've been with us from the beginning, we want to say a heartfelt thank you for making this series such a success.
Yes, thank you. We've loved reading your messages and hearing how these practices have impacted your lives. And even though this series is concluding, your journey with affirmations is ongoing, evolving and deepening as you grow.
If you're interested in continuing to explore personal development topics, we'd love to hear what you'd like us to cover in future series. Send us your suggestions through our website or social media channels.
And of course, if you've found value in Motivational Mornings, please share this series with friends or family who might benefit. Your recommendations help us reach more people with these empowering practices.
Until we meet again in a new series, keep affirming, keep tracking your progress, and keep celebrating every step of your journey. This is Clara.
And Leo, signing off from Motivational Mornings. Remember, your words create your reality. Choose them wisely.